Hey friends, Irene Lyon here. Welcome to this video, to this YouTube channel, and to this world of healing trauma, nervous system health, and all things neuroplasticity. Thank you for being here and checking out these videos. If you have been following me for a while, the video I'm going to talk to you and teach you today, the concepts I should say, they might be familiar. And I'm also going to be adding in a few more pieces that I haven't really focused on in the past, but the last string of videos I've put out are kind of in lead up to this in a way. Now, if you're brand new here, not to worry, you can take in this video and I'm going to suggest some other ones that you can go back to review and to sort of get the context. But in a nutshell, I want to talk about the survival responses, specifically the one that puts us into immobility. So we could say that that's part of if you think of fight, flight, and freeze, these are our autonomic nervous system responses that we are hardwired, we're wired to go into. That's why they're automatic, when there is a real threat. Even when we perceive threat, our system can ramp up into these survival responses. The one that is, to me, fascinating and one of the trickier ones to work with is the final one, that shutdown, that freeze response, what we would call, it can be called an immobility response. I'm going to give you an example just to put the context. If you think about that saying, that person looks like they're a deer with headlights in their eyes. You know, if you've ever been driving down a country road, or even in some cities where there's animals, wildlife, dark at night, and all of a sudden this animal, this deer, pops onto the road and it stops dead in its tracks. It senses they're in trouble because of the lights. And of course, granted, if you're not going too fast, you don't hit the animal, you stop, it takes a moment, and then it kind of looks, and then poof, it goes, right? It flees. But in that moment of pause, in that moment of immobility, in that moment of freeze, the system is in a survival response, but then it comes out of it. So I think that's an example that we can all relate to. Now, if we think of human beings, if you have ever experienced something that is massively threatening, maybe it is something like an accident, or maybe you grew up in a very dangerous and abusive household. Maybe you've had multiple surgeries when you were young. I often say young and when we were younger, because when we have had lots of stress and adversity growing up, and this is something I've talked about in many other videos, so again, I'll post some below, but when we have had a lot of adversity, stress, chronic micro traumas growing up, it influences us. It puts our system into what we would call a map of threat, a map of unsafety. I talked about this a little while ago in another video. I'm going to pop it below, where I talk about safety maps versus trauma maps. So let's just say that was your reality and things were very scary. Let's just say that your system had to go into that kind of deer in the headlight zone. You had to be immobile, either because you were physically attacked, maybe sexually attacked by caregivers, people within your household. Maybe you went into immobility because you wanted to speak up and say things, but you got slapped down, you got yelled at, you were literally frozen. And when we talk about humans, we often say frozen with fear. You heard that saying, frozen with fear. What gets tricky is that because we have that fear response along with the immobility, that becomes this dicier survival energy to deal with. That deer that I just talked about, while it is frozen, while it is immobile, there isn't a lot going on because of their higher brain not being as evolved as ours, or evolved might not be the best word, not as sophisticated in terms of cognition, memory, thinking, reasoning, right? So that deer, it isn't, as far as we know, saying to itself, holy shit, I might get hit. I don't know what to do. What should I do? What should I do? It's just total automatic animal instinct. I'm going to shut down, be immobile. And when it senses and the fancy word is neuroceptively, when it has the perception that it's okay and safe, it runs. That kid that I've kind of been talking about kind of as a generalization hypothetical, growing up in a toxic, abusive, threatening environment, or, and I like to say or, because some folks will be listening to this saying, hey, Irene, I have this frozen fear. I have tons of intense activation and huge survival energy in my body, but I really didn't have abuse. There really was safety in my household. So other things are, if we were born prematurely, if there was a lot of intense medical trauma, surgical trauma, I should say, if we had to be in an incubator where the touch and the pokes and maybe surgeries that occurred were super terrifying from the somatic level, then we can carry that and it is felt as terror, as fear. So I just wanted to put that as an aside so that for those of you that are like, really, there wasn't anything really that wrong, and honestly, you know that's true, there can be other types of traumatic events that can put our systems into this immobilization, this frozenness, but with fear. If you think about the classic example of, and I know this is a classic example because it's one of Peter Levine's stories about how he discovered the work of somatic experiencing. This is one of the things I practice, and I'll pop a video below where I explain it a bit more detail. But he had his aha discovery working with a young lady who had what we would now call chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and they traced her frozen fear, her immobilization along with fear, all of her intense symptoms, her fears of the world, going outside, chronic pain, back to her inability to flee, kind of like that deer in the headlights. She couldn't flee when she was young, undergoing a tonsillectomy, right? She was held down. I don't know if she was strapped down, but struggle, hold down, put the ether over the face to put the person to sleep so that they can do the surgery. And so when we go to sleep, or when we have got a traumatic event occur and we want to flee like that deer, but we can't, and we're petrified because we're registering with our more higher sophistication of a human system, this is not right, this is very scary, something is wrong, someone's hurting me, but I can't understand it. That gets trapped in our system. So that's a long introduction to what I want to talk about next. And so let's just say, again, hypothetically, this is something that occurred to you or people that you know, or maybe you work with clients. Now, please know that this video is not to give you instruction necessarily on what to do. It's to give you the educational input so you understand another piece of this nervous system somatic healing pie that is very complex. It is hard to give you everything in one 30-minute video, so that's why we're chunking these down. So just know that the next piece I'm going to talk about, see this as education, as information, and then of course, if you want to dive into more work, do that with a qualified somatic practitioner, do that through my programs and online courses, but know that this is just a piece. I just need to give that little bit of info. So one of the common things that my clients and students will say is that they're feeling, as they get into this work, as they get to be more connected to their body, they know that they're not healing with all the other things that they have tried, really good things, right? Things that are very valid and work in many different avenues. But they know they have this lifetime intense frozen fear. They had to go into immobility due to whatever traumatic events they survived. And they know that they feel huge amounts of what we would call activation in their system. This, in kind of general terms, we would call anxiety, panic, terror, fear, just the sense of the world is dangerous. People even are fidgety, ADD, like this attention deficit, always hypervigilant, looking for the next threat to come in at them energetically, physically, emotionally, verbally, whatever. So many of them have this activation in their system, and it's somatic. They feel it. It's intense. And sometimes they'll say, I can feel myself going into the desire to want to shut down, to want to go into freeze. Now, because we say freeze isn't good to live in, there's often this thought that we should never touch into it. And this is where this story gets a bit more complex. We don't want to touch into it if we know we're going to completely dissociate or rebound into more activation. Basically, those are the two things. We don't want to go into that freeze response if we know we don't have the tools to stay connected to the here and now. So, and aside to that, some of the main principles that need to be practiced and dare I say perfected in a way before we can do deeper heavy lifting work of all the old traumatic events is we need to be damn good at staying connected to the ground. Here I am in environment. Here's my body. My name is Irene. It's April 16th. I'm in Vancouver. I'm making this video and I'm feeling all this activation. And here I am. I'm still here. I see the birds outside and I'm feeling all this activation. And what I'm wanting to convey is that one of the things that a person will start to maybe tip over into, because when they were young, so stay with me here, this is a little more of a loop. When they were young, when they felt that high activation, that threat, that danger, that, oh my God, I'm going to get abused again, people will say, I went numb. I blanked out, or I was above my body seeing it all happen. So that's kind of a fracturing, if you will, of the body and the psyche from the system. It's like they get separated. And so this is where memory loss comes in. There's big gaps that people don't remember. And it's because the system is going into this immobility, but with intense fear. That's that frozen fear. Very different than the deer, right? That is just in freeze, immobility. And then as soon as it senses it's safe, green light, go, okay, I'm gone. Kiddos, people that kids growing up, even of course, teenagers, adults, it's really not just reserved for the kids, but they're more immature. They have less knowledge on how to get out of the way, how to leave, how to fight. And when they're really little, they can't fight. That example of that client of Peter's who was really young, there's no way she was going to fight off an anesthesiologist, 3 nurses, and a doctor. There was no point of her trying to, not no point. She tried, but there's no way she's going to get out of that. So reeling back, let's just say again, back to that example. This person knows that they have all this survival energy that's trapped and old. They know that, they want to work with it, and they know they have all this activation, and they're game in, they're feeling it, they are in their bodies, and all of a sudden, let's just say, again, this is hypothetical, but this happens, they're starting to feel the pull of that immobility. They're starting to feel their body go numb. They're starting to feel this sense of, I can't move. They're starting to feel their breath rate go down. Metabolism slows down, and this happens. In current time, our system will, in some ways, relive. It's not reliving, because reliving would mean going back to the past, but it's re-experiencing, I should say, the physiological responses that once actually happened, but they're experiencing it now. It's very interesting that our systems can hold this in. So they feel that, and they're like, I'm being pulled into a bit of that sleepy, we would call it high dorsal tone state of the parasympathetic. I did another video on that on the polyvagal theory. Check it out if you want more information on that. So they're going into this freezy, immobile sense of physiology taken over. It's automatic. It's coming online, and they have the tools. They know they have the tools to stay contained, stay here, stay grounded. In those moments, if I was working with a client, I would say, let yourself go into that immobility. Let yourself feel the freezy nature that you experienced back when you were, say, 5 years old, but you didn't have the faculties, the experience, nor the tools to stay out of the fear response. I'll say that again. At that point, when we were young, we didn't have the ability to stay online and know how to stay connected to the environment in that immobility, but without the fear. And if we can stay in the present moment and watch it and track it and feel all the amazing things that our body does to protect us, you'd be surprised at how it can become a very curiosity-driven way to somatically experience your system. That's why Peter's work is called somatic experiencing. You are experiencing all of the somatic qualities that your body had to shut down to stay safe in not only body, but in mind. And if we go further, in spirit and soul. It's just sometimes too much to feel what's going on. But let's just say, again, hypothetically, you're an adult. You have gained the skills and capacities to stay with intensity, stay grounded. When you feel that little trickle of immobility, that can actually be a really good sign that your system is ready to process that fear, that immobility response, that autonomic nervous system response that hasn't properly been what we would call renegotiated, integrated, released, however you want to call it. We just didn't have the capacity. But if we have the capacity, we actually want to dabble with feeling immobility without fear. I'll say that one more time. We want to be able to sense and feel. Again, granted, there was that in your history. For those of us that didn't have to go into immobility due to survival stresses and traumas, then this might not be applicable to you. It may not be, but for those that did, for those who know that their systems go back and forth between high levels of activation and then shutting down and feeling terrified, we want to go over the edge and feel that immobility, sense that freeze response, but without the fear, Getting to that point is very individual. Everyone is different. And you have to understand that the only way you will find that in your own capacity is to do this work, to get into the somatic systems, to, like I said, find a practitioner to work with me and my team through my programs, take the long road, learn the essentials, learn the education, learn the basics. As I said at the beginning of this, get really expert at the basics, staying connected to the environment, staying connected to the body, being able to track and trace the breath, being able to know where you are, where your feet are, what is around you. One of the things that often is, I think, not understood is that in order to heal the past traumas that we have endured and survived, we're going to have to taste them again. We're going to have to experience the somatic qualities that we at one point could not feel. And to heal, to renegotiate, to come out the other side means to gather all of these faculties as adults. Granted, you're an adult, you probably are if you're watching this, so that we have really the skill set to navigate these things that we just didn't have the skill set to navigate when we were young. So to roll this back, again, this is sort of a continuation video from previous videos, and it can stand alone in that I wanted to talk a little bit more about the intricacies of the human system, the fight, flight, freeze response, how when we have had early trauma, adversity, bad things happen to us, we will undoubtedly, if we have not done specific work on this. So again, bear in mind that to work at this level means to specifically work at this level. It's hard to get to this level with just general mind-body work or general more cognitive behavioral therapy. We have to have the lens of the physiology, the survival stress, the sensations, the feelings, all of the human system. So this idea of being able to be with the old stuff that we trapped in our bodies because we were just too young or too inexperienced to know what to do with them. We may have been trapped in an immobility or, again, that freeze response with fear, and we're trying to pry them apart, essentially. We're trying to neutralize that fear and focus on the immobility, but without the fear. And again, it takes time to get to this level. So remember, watch some of my other videos, especially on the concepts of titration, the concepts of pendulation. These are, again, concepts that I learned and that Peter Levine popularized through his work, Somatic Experiencing. This is really some of the bread and butter of what he teaches his students, and that, of course, us as his colleagues work out in the world with people and groups and our clients and students. And it's one of those things that just it's rarely talked about. So again, bottom line, the survival responses are not bad. They are essential. They get tricky when we have fear connected to them. And so part of healing ourselves and moving forward is being able to have a higher level of awareness in our body, in our somatic systems, so that we can detach that fear from those survival responses so that they really become disarmed and shift really for good. And that's what we want. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Again, check out other videos if you're new here, or if you've been around for a while, review some of the older ones. I hope this has been useful. Keep learning, keep up the good work, and we will see you next time.